A tornado ripped through my town, shredding everything I had built. When the storm passed, I thought I could lean on my family for comfort. But instead, they looked me in the eye and said, "There's no room for you here." That's when I realized they hadn't just turned their backs on me. They had declared war, and I was about to give them one they'd never forget. My name is Michael Harris, and I'm 48 years old. I've never thought of myself as a weak man. Life had thrown storms my way before, losing my father at 16, working 2 jobs in my 20s to keep a roof over my mother's head, even building a small construction company with my bare hands. But nothing prepared me for what happened the summer the tornado came. It started like any other humid July morning in Kansas. Sticky air, restless sky. But by late afternoon, the sirens wailed, and within minutes, the world turned black. Shingles ripped off roofs, power lines snapped, and the sound, God, the sound, was like a freight train running straight to my living room. When it was over, my house was nothing but splinters and memories. The home I had built, where my late wife and I had raised our 2 children, was gone. I stood barefoot in the rubble, staring at the twisted wreckage of my dining room table, the one where we used to share Christmas dinners. I should have been grateful to be alive, but instead, I felt like the storm had hollowed me out from inside. With nowhere else to go, I packed a duffel bag and drove to my parents' house an hour away. My mother opened the door, shock written all over her face as she took in the dirt on my clothes, the cut on my forehead. My father came to the door too, his one strong frame now shrunken with age. For a second, I thought I'd found safety. But then, my mother cleared her throat and glanced at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Michael," she said quietly, "we don't have space here. The basement's full, and your sister's boys are already staying over, while their school's closed. You'll have to figure something else out." I blinked, certain I hadn't heard right. "Mom, my house is gone. I don't have anywhere else." She shifted uncomfortably, folding her arms. "You're strong. You'll figure it out. We're too old to deal with extra stress." It felt like a slap. My own parents, the people I had sacrificed when I was young, were shutting the door on me when I needed them most. I ended up in a cheap motel that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the broken AC. The betrayal cut deeper than the storm's destruction. It wasn't just a loss of shelter. It was a realization that the people who should have stood beside me had chosen to turn away. But worse was yet to come. A week later, my son Daniel and his wife Rebecca pulled up to the motel in their shiny SUV. Daniel, 30 years old and already carrying himself like he knew more about the world than I ever could, clapped me on the shoulder. "Dad, you shouldn't be staying in this dump. Come with us. We'll figure things out." Relief washed over me. Maybe my parents had failed me, but my son wouldn't. I grabbed my duffel and followed them, telling myself that blood still meant something. When we got to their house, Rebecca greeted me with a smile too polished to be real. She had that look in her eyes, a mixture of pity and calculation. At first, everything seemed fine. They gave me the guest room, cooked me dinner, and insisted I rest. But as the days passed, little things started to shift. Daniel began making decisions without asking me, changing where my things went, selling off some of my belongings that had survived the storm to make space. Rebecca started dropping comments like, "This isn't permanent, right? And you'll get back on your feet soon, won't you?" I told myself it was stress, that they meant well. But deep down, I felt the ground shifting beneath me again, just like the tornado had ripped it away. Only this time, it wasn't nature. It was my own family. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Rebecca's voice replaying in my head like a broken record. I had gotten up for a glass of water, only to hear her in the kitchen with Daniel, speaking in a tone that made my stomach twist. "He's already too comfortable here," she whispered sharply. "This can't drag on forever. We have our own lives. Daniel, we can't babysit him." I froze. Babysit? I was his father, not some burden left on their doorstep. Daniel's reply came softer, but no less cutting. "I know. Just give it time. He'll figure it out, or he won't." I retreated quietly back to my room, the glass of water forgotten. My chest ached, not just from the sting of their words, but from the dawning realization I wasn't a guest in their home. I was an inconvenience, one they were already plotting to get rid of. The days that followed proved it. At first, it was small things. Rebecca began rearranging my few belongings. The framed photo of my late wife that I kept by the bedside vanished one afternoon, only to reappear later on the top shelf of the closet. My work boots, which I left neatly by the back door, ended up in the garage without anyone asking. "Just keeping the place tidy," Rebecca chirped when I asked. But the smile she gave me didn't reach her eyes. Daniel wasn't much better. He started making comments about my future, always phrased as if he were helping, but each one chipped away at my dignity. "Dad, maybe it's time you thought about downsizing permanently. Dad, you don't need so much stuff. You're alone now. Simplify. Dad, you could sell what's left of your land and start fresh." Every word carried the same message. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. I tried to keep my peace, swallowing my pride for the sake of keeping a roof over my head. But every day, their home felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. One afternoon, I returned from a walk around the block, my only escape from the suffocating tension inside, to find Rebecca in my room, sorting through my duffel bag. She looked up, startled, then forced a laugh. "Oh, I was just checking to see if you needed laundry done." But her hands were holding the deed papers I'd salvaged from the storm, the documents of the plot of land where my house once stood. I snatched them from her, anger tightening my voice. "You don't touch my things without asking," I said. Rebecca's smile faltered for the briefest second, then returned, sweeter than honey but twice as poisonous. "Of course, Michael. Just trying to help." That night at dinner, Daniel suddenly announced that they'd made plans to renovate the guest room. "It'll be great, Dad," he said casually, stabbing his steak with his fork. "We'll open up the space, maybe convert it into an office. More useful than just storage." I set down my fork slowly. "That's my room, Daniel." Rebecca gave a light laugh. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're just thinking ahead. You won't need to be here forever." Her words landed like a hammer blow. Not only were they pushing me out in spirit, but they were already preparing to erase me from the house entirely. The final straw came a week later. I walked into the living room to find Rebecca hosting her friends. She was animated, gesturing toward me as if I were some exhibit in a zoo. "He lost everything in the tornado," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "We've been so generous taking him in. It's been hard, but what can you do? Family obligations, right?" Her friends nodded sympathetically, their eyes darting toward me with that same mix of curiosity and judgment. My face burned. I wasn't charity case. I wasn't some washed-up stray dog they'd rescued. I went back to my room, fists clenched, and stared at the crumpled photo of my wife I had rescued from their closet. I thought of the life we'd built together, the house I had worked for with every ounce of sweat in my body. And now, my own flesh and blood was turning me into a stranger in his home. The motel had felt cold, but this was worse. At least in that small room with the broken AC, I had my dignity. Here, I was being slowly stripped of it, piece by piece. And then, one evening as I tried to sleep, I heard Daniel and Rebecca again through thin walls. This time, their words weren't whispers. They were sharp, clear, and deliberate. "He'll never stand on his own again," Rebecca said. "If we play this right, we can make sure that land becomes ours. Imagine what we could build there." Daniel's voice followed, lower but steady. "It's a smart move. He won't fight back. He never does." My blood went cold. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were plotting to take what little I had left. The night I overheard them talking about my land, something inside me snapped. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to Rebecca's voice drip with greed as she told my son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed for, that my future didn't matter, that I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of their plans. For days, I carried that poison in my veins. I moved around the house like a ghost, keeping my head down, saying little, but every word, every laugh, every casual dismissal from him only fanned the flames inside me. I remembered the man I used to be, The one who had spent 20 years hauling lumber and pouring concrete to build a business from scratch. The one who had stayed up nights, bleeding and sweating to make sure his children had what they needed. The one my wife used to call her rock. That man had been buried by grief when she passed. He had been broken further by the tornado that stole my home. And now, he was being mocked in whispers and smirks by his own family. But as I looked at the photo of my wife, the one they kept hiding away like it was clutter, I realized something. She wouldn't have wanted me to lie down and take it. She would have told me to stand, to fight, to show them that the man she married wasn't gone. He was just waiting. The fog of despair lifted, and for the first time in months, clarity struck me like lightning. I wasn't just unlucky. I wasn't just some victim of storms, whether from nature or from blood. No, I had let myself believe that. But now I saw the truth. They wanted my land, my family's last piece of heritage, the ground where I had once built a home with my own 2 hands. That was their plan all along. Shelter me, make me dependent, weaken me, then swoop in and take the only thing I had left of value. And in that moment, my sorrow turned to steel. The next morning, I put on my work boots, the same pair Rebecca had tossed into the garage weeks ago, and laced them tight. Stand in the mirror, I saw a man I almost didn't recognize. His face was worn, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, but behind them burned something fierce. Determination. I started small. At breakfast, Rebecca chirped on about renovations again, hinting that once I settled things with the land, I could contribute to their plans. Daniel nodded like it was already decided. But this time, I didn't stay silent. Funny thing about that land, I said, sipping my coffee slowly. It's already taken care of. Papers locked up, safe and sound. Their eyes flickered. Just for a second, Rebecca tried to mask her surprise with a laugh. Oh, we're just thinking about what's best for you, Michael. I smiled thinly. I'm sure you are. They thought I was bluffing. They thought the tired, grieving man in front of them was too broken to do anything. But inside, I was already planning. That afternoon, while they were out running errands, I dug through my things. I pulled out the deed, the insurance papers, and a set of keys I had almost forgotten about, the office of an old friend, someone who had once been my lawyer back when I ran the construction company. I held the keys in my hand and felt the weight of memory. Back then, I had power. Back then, I made decisions that shaped futures. Why should now be any different? For the first time since the tornado, I had a plan. I would not let my son and his wife rob me of the last piece of my dignity. If they wanted war over that land, they'd get it. But it wouldn't be a battle fought with shouting matches and tears. No, I'd fight the way I always had, with strategy, with patience, with quiet, decisive action. That night, I lay in bed with my heart steady, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I thought of the look on their faces when they realized I wasn't their victim. I thought of Rebecca's smug smile shattering, Daniel's arrogance crumbling. They believed I would roll over. They believed I was weak. But they were about to learn that storms don't just destroy. Sometimes, storms create survivors, fighters, men who refuse to be erased. The morning sun broke over the horizon as I drove down familiar roads I hadn't taken in years. The truck rattled beneath me, the old engine groaning, but it still carried me forward. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, not from nerves, but from purpose. I wasn't running anymore. I was moving toward something. My destination was a small brick building on the corner of Main Street. The law office of Robert Whitman, an old friend from my construction days. Robert and I had gone to high school together. And though life had pulled us in different directions, he'd always been a man of integrity. When my wife passed, he helped me sort through paperwork without charging a dime. If anyone could help me now, it was him. I pushed open the glass door. Inside, the place smelled of old books and coffee, exactly as I remembered. Robert looked up from behind his desk, his hair more silver than brown now. Glasses perched low on his nose. His eyes widened. "Michael Harris," he said, standing to greet me. "Well, damn, it's been years. I heard about the tornado. I'm so sorry, my friend." I shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate it, but I'm not here for sympathy, Robert. I need your help." He gestured for me to sit, his expression sharpening as he sensed the seriousness in my tone. I laid out everything. The tornado, the motel, my parents shutting me out, and finally, Daniel and Rebecca's plan to steal my land. Robert listened without interruption, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When I finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Legally, you're in a strong position," he said. "That land is in your name, as long as you protect it. Keep the deed safe. Make sure it's recorded properly. They can't touch it without your consent. But if they try to manipulate you into signing it over or forge something, well, then we've got trouble." I nodded slowly. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. They think I'm too broken to fight. I want to make sure they never get the chance to take anything from me. Robert adjusted his glasses. "We can put protections in place. A trust, maybe. Something that locks the land until you decide otherwise. That way, even if they pressure you, your hands will be tied, legally speaking." The idea lit a fire inside me. A trust, a shield against their greed. For once, I could play offense instead of defense. "Do it," I said firmly, "whatever it takes. I don't care about the money. I just won't let them win." Robert gave me a small smile. That's the Michael I remember. When I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in months. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting, strategizing, building something solid, just like I had built every foundation of every house that once stood under my company's name. Back at Daniel's house, I kept my mask on. Rebecca asked where I'd gone, her smile tight with suspicion. I shrugged casually. "Job center. Looking for work. Can't mooch off you forever, right?" Her expression softened with relief, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She thought I was scrambling, desperate, exactly as they had hoped. Good. Let her believe it. Over the next week, I moved quietly. While they slept, I organized what little I had left: papers, receipts, proof of insurance. I went through old storage boxes I had rescued from the storm's wreckage, pulling out anything that could strengthen my case. At night, I wrote in a notebook, outlining each step. Secure the land through Robert's trust. Withdraw what savings remained from the bank. Move it where they couldn't touch it. Document everything, every insult, every attempt at manipulation. This wasn't just about defense. It was about preparing for the day when I would confront them, when the truth would crush their arrogance. And yet, I knew timing was everything. If I moved too soon, they'd sense it. If I waited too long, they might try something reckless. The hardest part was hiding my resolve. Pretending to be the broken man they thought I was. Every time Rebecca moved my belongings or Daniel hinted at selling the land, I had to bite my tongue, swallow my pride, and nod along. But inside, I was no longer their victim. I was a soldier waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, Rebecca brought up again over dinner. "Michael, it would be easier for everyone if you just sold that land. We could use the money to renovate, and you wouldn't have to worry anymore." I met her gaze, forcing my face into a mask of weariness. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. Her eyes glittered with victory, and Daniel gave me a satisfied nod. They thought they were winning. But inside I was smiling, because I knew something they didn't. The land was already out of their reach. The morning after I finalized the trust with Robert, I felt different. The heaviness that had followed me since the tornado was gone. My steps felt deliberate. My mind was clear. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving. I was planning to win. I kept my mask firmly in place. Around Daniel and Rebecca, I played the weary guest. I kept my shoulders slumped, my voice low, and I let them believe they still had the upper hand. But behind that mask, every move I made was calculated. The first step was securing what little I had left. I visited the bank under the excuse of checking my balance. In reality, I withdrew the last of my savings and opened a new account at a credit union Rebecca didn't even know existed. Quietly, I moved the funds. It wasn't much compared to what I once had, but it was mine, untouchable. The second step was rebuilding my strength. Each morning, before anyone else was awake, I went for long walks around the neighborhood. At first, it was just to clear my head, but soon I added push-ups, sit-ups, stretches. My body ached, but the ache was good. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable. I wouldn't be caught looking frail. When the time came to stand tall, the third step was gathering evidence. I started keeping a small notebook in my pocket. Every comment, every insult, every time Rebecca or Daniel spoke about land, I wrote it down. At first, I thought it might just help me keep track. But Robert had been clear. Documentation mattered. If this ever went to court, my word alone wouldn't be enough. One evening, my chance came. I walked into the living room and found Rebecca on the phone with one of her friends. She was pacing, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she used whenever she wanted to sound innocent. Once he finally agrees to sign, we'll be set. Honestly, it's exhausting keeping up this act, but it'll be worth it. That land is worth more than he even realizes. I stayed in the hallway, silent, my heart pounding. She had said it herself. Keeping up the act. Proof, in her own words, that this wasn't about family or love or helping me. It was about greed. Later that night, I wrote down every word I remembered. The notebook was filling quickly, but even with the trust in place and the money secured, I knew there was one final piece to my plan. Letting them dig their own grave. Rebecca kept pressing about the land. She'd bring it up casually at dinner, sometimes joking, sometimes serious. Daniel followed her lead, dropping hints that it's better to just let go of the past. So I leaned into their game. I started acting more uncertain, letting my voice shake when I spoke about the future. I even told Rebecca one afternoon, maybe you're right. Maybe I should think about selling. Her face lit up like she'd won the lottery. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Michael, if you let us handle it, we can make sure it's done right. You'd still benefit, but without the stress. I nodded slowly, forcing my lips into a weak smile. I'll think about it. Inside, I was laughing. They had no idea that the land was already locked beyond their reach. No idea that every word they spoke was strengthening the case I was building. Over the next week, I began moving things out of the house, little by little, so they wouldn't notice. Important papers, the photo of my wife, even a notebook. I took them to a small storage unit I rented nearby. If things turned ugly, I didn't want to risk losing everything again. And then, one evening, Daniel made his move. He slid a folder across the dinner table, trying to look casual. Dad, Rebecca and I talked with a realtor friend. Just some preliminary paperwork. Nothing binding. If you wanted to look it over. I opened the folder. Inside were blank transfer forms, ready for my signature. My pulse quickened, but I forced my expression to stay calm, tired. I'll take a look, I said softly, closing the folder. Maybe tomorrow. Daniel grinned. Rebecca practically glowing with victory. They thought they had me. But as I carried the folder back to my room, I already knew how this would end. They had walked straight into the trap I'd been setting. When I walked into Robert's office the next morning, the folder tucked under my arm, I felt like a soldier delivering captured enemy plans. Robert raised an eyebrow as I placed it on his desk. Let me guess, he said, flipping through the forms. They want you to sign away the land. Not want, I replied. Expect. They think I'll cave. Robert's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, this makes our case stronger. Their intent is clear. I left the office with copies safely filed, the originals still in my possession. My chest felt lighter, but I knew the storm wasn't over. The confrontation was coming. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like the pressure before a tornado. Sure enough, that evening at dinner, Rebecca couldn't hold back. So, Michael, she said sweetly, eyes darting to the folder I no longer had. Did you have a chance to look over the paperwork? I set down my fork deliberately, letting the silence stretch. Then I looked up, meeting her gaze. I did, I said calmly, and I took it to Robert Whitman. The smile froze on her face. Daniel stiffened, his knuckles whitening around his glass. Robert, he asked carefully, why would you? Because I interrupted, my voice steady now, sharper than they'd ever heard. I want to make sure I understood exactly what you were trying to do. Turns out, you've been playing a dangerous game. Rebecca's cheeks flushed. We were only trying to help. You don't know how to handle this kind of paperwork anymore. You thought I was weak. I snapped. You thought you could corner me into signing away the last piece of my life. But I'm not as broken as you think. The room went silent. The clink of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed deafening. Daniel set his glass down hard, the thud echoing against the table. Dad, you're overreacting, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. We just wanted what's best for you. What's best for me? I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. Was it best for me when you rifled through my things without asking? When you hid my wife's photo like it was trash? When you whispered about selling my land while I slept under your roof? Rebecca flinched. Daniel looked down, but I wasn't finished. You both saw me as a burden, a man too tired to fight back. But here's the truth. That land is already untouchable. I put it in a trust. You'll never lay your hands on it. Not now, not ever. Rebecca's mask cracked. The sweetness drained from her face, replaced by raw anger. You ungrateful old fool, she hissed. We took you in when no one else would. We fed you, gave you a bed, treated you like family. Family? My voice boomed louder than I'd intended, years of pain surging to the surface. Family doesn't plot behind closed doors to steal what isn't theirs. Family doesn't mock or manipulate. Family doesn't throw a man out when the storm has already taken everything from him. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Enough. You're twisting this. You've always been stubborn. Dad. Always controlling. Maybe this is your fault. Fault. I leaned back, suddenly calm. If it's my fault for trusting my own blood, then I'll take that blame. But make no mistake, you've lost me. And when you lose a man who gave you everything, you'll feel that emptiness every day you breathe. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but her hands trembled. Daniel tried to speak, but nothing came. They weren't in control anymore. The balance had shifted, and they knew it. I stood, pushing my chair back. I'll be gone by tomorrow morning. I'll take my things and leave this house. You'll never have to babysit me again, but don't expect me to look back when the world catches up with you, because it will. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving them in stunned silence. Behind me, I could hear Rebecca's sharp whisper, Daniel's frustrated reply. Their voices rose and fell, but I didn't care. For once, their chaos was theirs alone. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings into duffel, I felt no fear, no sadness, just resolve. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had set me free. The morning light spilled through the blinds as I zipped up my duffel bag. Every item inside had been carefully chosen. Papers, the photo of my wife, the few clothes I hadn't let Rebecca donate. Each piece felt like a brick in the foundation of the life I was about to rebuild. I walked through the house quietly, the way a man leaves behind a battlefield after victory. The walls felt colder now, the air heavier, but I felt none of it pressing down on me. Instead, I felt light, unburdened. Daniel and Rebecca didn't come downstairs as I left. Whether they were too ashamed or too angry, I didn't care. I set my key on the kitchen counter and let the sound of it echo in the silence. A clean break. When I stepped outside, the air smelled fresh, like rain had passed in the night. I loaded my things into the truck and slid behind the wheel. As the engine rumbled to life, a sense of freedom surged through me. For the first time since the tornado, I wasn't running. I was moving forward. My first stop was a storage unit. I unloaded the duffel, stacking the items neatly inside. Looking around that small concrete room, I realized it wasn't emptiness. It was potential. This was where I would begin again. Over the next week, I threw myself into building a new routine. Robert helped me set up the trust fully, securing the land beyond any reach. We even arranged for the land to be leased to a local farmer. The income wasn't huge, but it was steady, enough to keep me independent. That alone felt like victory. I found a small apartment above a hardware store downtown. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms, a tiny kitchen, and a view of Main Street, but it was mine. No one could tell me where to put my things. No one could move my wife's photo to a closet. For the first time in months, I hung it proudly on the wall, right above the table where I ate my dinner. The quiet was different here. Not the silence of being unwelcome, but the peace of having space that belonged to me. I filled the hours with walks, odd jobs, even helping out at the hardware store when the owner needed an extra hand. Slowly, I began to feel like myself again, not the broken man Daniel and Rebecca wanted me to be, but the man who had built a life out of nothing before. And word travels fast in small towns. It didn't take long before I heard about their troubles. Daniel had made some risky investments. Rebecca had pushed him into it, chasing dreams of easy money. Without access to my land or any hope of selling it, they were drowning. Creditors were circling. Friends had grown scarce. One afternoon, I spotted them on Main Street. Rebecca's smile was gone, replaced by sharp lines of worry. Daniel looked older, tired, weighed down by mistakes. They saw me, and for a moment, I thought Daniel might come over. But then he looked away, pulling Rebecca along, shame written all over his face. I didn't feel gloating pride. What I felt was something better, closure. They had chosen greed over loyalty, manipulation over love. And now, they were left with the consequences. That night, I sat in my small apartment, the glow of the lamp warm against the photo of my wife. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and raised it in the quiet. To us, I whispered, to standing tall when they tried to break me. I thought of the storm that had destroyed my home. I thought of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. And then I thought of where I was now, alive, standing, unbroken. Life doesn't always give you back what you lose. But sometimes it gives you something better, the strength to let go of what tried to bury you, and the power to build again on your own terms. The land was safe. My dignity was mine. And my future, however modest, was mine to shape. As I blew out the lamp and the room fell into darkness, I knew this much. Storms will come, people will fail you, but a man who refuses to bow cannot be taken from. Not truly. A month passed since I walked out of Daniel's house and left behind the poison of betrayal. Life had settled into a rhythm, one far simpler than before the tornado, but somehow more meaningful. Every morning I woke up in my little apartment above the hardware store, brewed a pot of coffee, and stood by the window watching the town stir to life. The world felt smaller, but in that smallness, I found freedom. I worked when I wanted, sometimes helping the store owner fix broken shelves, other times lending a hand at the farmer's market. People began to greet me not with pity, but with respect. They knew what had happened. They knew I had been tested and had come out the other side, standing tall. Still, there were moments when the silence pressed in. At night, I'd catch myself staring at my wife's photo, missing the sound of her laugh, wishing she were here to see me rebuild. But then I'd remember her words from years ago. Michael, you've got more fight in you than you'll ever admit. She had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. Now I believe again, too. One Saturday, Robert called. His voice carried the weight of something important. Michael, he said, remember that trust we set up for your land? Well, the farmer leasing it wants to meet you. He says there's potential to expand, something that could bring in more income, steady and long-term. I drove out that afternoon, curious. The sight of my land nearly brought tears to my eyes. The tornado had taken the house, but the earth itself remained untouched, resilient. Just like me, rows of crops had already been planted where the wreckage once lay. Life was sprouting again from the soil I thought I'd lost forever. The farmer, a sturdy man named Carl, shook my hand firmly. Your land's good, Michael. Better than most. With your blessing, I'd like to double production here, and I'll make sure you see your share every season. I agreed without hesitation. It wasn't about the money, though that would help. It was about the symbolism. The land was alive again, productive, untouchable by greedy hands. What Daniel and Rebecca had wanted to take was now working to keep me steady. Later that week, I crossed paths with Daniel again. He was alone this time, shoulders slumped, his face hollowed by stress. He tried to meet my eyes, but couldn't hold the gaze. For a second, I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who once followed me around job sites, proud to carry my tools. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he lowered his head and walked past. I didn't call after him. I didn't gloat. I simply watched him go, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and release. I couldn't fix what he had chosen to become. That was his path, and he would have to walk it. My path was my own now. In the evenings, I began writing again. Nothing fancy, just thoughts, reflections, pieces of the story I had lived. I wanted to leave behind more than just deeds and land. I wanted to leave behind truth. Maybe one day my grandchildren, or even Daniel, if he ever grew the courage, would read my words and understand. As the days turned into weeks, I realized something powerful. Revenge had been the spark, but it wasn't the destination. I hadn't just fought back to keep my land. I had fought back to keep myself, to reclaim the man I thought the storm had washed away. And in winning that fight, I discovered a new beginning. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I drove out to the land again. The crops swayed in the breeze, the horizon painted gold. I walked the rows slowly, breathing in the scent of earth and growth. I stopped at the spot where my house once stood. For a moment, I closed my eyes and pictured it. The porch, the laughter, my wife's hands resting on mine. Then I opened my eyes and saw the new life rising in its place. I smiled. The past would always live in my memory, but the future was mine to shape.